This happened to me in Formosa, Argentina, when I was 6 years old. To this day, I cannot explain it well too, and every time that I tell it, it always gives me chills. My mother had gone to the store, and my grandmother, who lived with us, was not home that day. I was left alone, taking care of my newborn sister. It was a very calm but heavy afternoon, one of those in which the air feels thick and everything is silent. I remember it perfectly, because it was just before sunset. I was sitting in the living room, watching my little sister sleep, when I heard a knock on the back door. It wasn't normal for them to use that door, so I approached carefully. When I looked out of the window, I saw my mum, or at least someone who looked exactly like her. But there was something strange. She didn't have a bag, and she seemed to come from afar, and the hair was a bit messy. The clothes had dirt on them as well, as if they had taken a walk through the countryside or something. And her eyes, I don't know how to explain it, but they weren't my mum's. They didn't shine like hers. They had no expression, I guess. Honestly, it was sort of like looking at an empty version of her, I guess. They spoke to me, smiling. "Come, my love, let's go back for a little while." I told them no. I stood on the other side of the door waiting for them to open it, but they didn't do it. They weren't getting any closer either, and they stayed there, standing in the doorway as if something was stopping her almost. And they kept repeating, "Come, it's okay, just for a little while." It scared me so much that I started to back away. I told them that I didn't want to go, and if they wanted to come in, then they should. But they didn't. Then they started to walk away, but not with their back turned. They did it while looking at me the entire time, weirdly without blinking. They walked towards the back, towards the field where the light was already beginning to go out, and the last thing that I heard from their voice was, "Come on, come with me." When they disappeared into the trees, I ensured the door was tightly closed, and I went straight to my little sister. I hugged her tightly, and I didn't move from there until later, when my real mother arrived, with the shopping bags and all the sweat from the heat. She didn't understand why I was so scared at first, obviously, but after I told her everything, it definitely was not her who had come before. I never knew what that was, but I surely never forgot it. From that day on, too, I never looked at that back of the house the same way ever again, but I was always on the lookout for strangers. Even now, I find myself still looking for them, thinking that perhaps one day, whoever that was, will return. I found an old text that I wrote years ago, right after one of the strangest episodes of my childhood. I recently read it and felt the need to give that story a new form, I suppose, to organize it better and revisit more clearly that fear that, in a way, still definitely lives inside of me. So during our childhood, my sister Alice and I were very close. We slept in the same room, laughed together a lot, shared toys and fears. That lasted until I was about 6 or 7 and got my own room. It was a defining moment because, along with a sense of freedom and independence, came something strange. I remember exactly the time that something felt off too. Alice said to me, as casually as could be, "Lucas, why do you keep watching me at night and never say anything?" "What? I never did that, Alice." "Stop lying, seriously. Stop standing at the door and just staring at me." I thought that it was some kind of a joke, a childish attempt to scare me. She never brought it up again though, but a few nights later I started waking up to her screaming. "Get out, Lucas, leave me alone," she would scream. And I had been asleep, always asleep. At first I tried not to give it too much importance. We all have imaginations, I thought at the time. But over time it started getting to me, and why was she seeing me standing at the door? What did that even mean? Recently, now that we're older, she told me everything. Her eyes were full of tears as if she were reliving every moment. She said that for about a whole year she saw me standing there every single night, silent, shadowy, and just watching. It was me, apparently, but at the same time it wasn't. She swore that it was real. She said that my body looked like it was covered in a dense shadow, as if the hallway light refused to touch me. I never responded, never moved. I just stood there, a human silhouette with my face. The last appearance was the worst, though. Go away, Lucas. But nothing. Seriously, stop it. Silence, and then get out, she said. And then the figure started walking toward her. She screamed for help, and my dad rushed into the room. She was begging, "Dad, get Lucas out of here. He tried to attack me." And then came the sentence that chilled me to the bone. "Alice, Lucas is asleep with me." After that, the figure never appeared again. But Alice was never the same. She started sleeping with the light on, or in our parents' room. She said that she developed a technique to turn the light off with her eyes closed, just so she wouldn't have to see me standing there. Even now, years later, she still says a prayer every night. And mind you, we're agnostic. But she doesn't sleep without praying, whether it's for caution, fear, or trauma, I'm not sure. As for me, I still wonder what the heck that was. I personally never saw anything. I never felt anything, but knowing that someone or something used my face to terrify my sister leaves me with an unease that I still carry to this day. Was something trying to pretend to be me, or did something inside me leave at night without my knowing? I don't have any answers. Really, I just have chills. Some call it a doppelganger, others talk about skinwalkers. Maybe it was just a child's imagination, but if so, why am I still afraid to look in the mirror at night? I really just hope that it was imagination playing tricks on her, because if it wasn't, well, I don't want to think about that. This happened several months ago while I, male, was moving cross-country to Las Vegas. I arrived the night before I was supposed to check in and get the keys to my new apartment. I didn't feel it was necessary to get a hotel room, so I decided to sleep for a few hours at a pilot travel stop and then head to my apartment in the morning. There was a parking area to the side of the building with 3 or 4 rows of spaces. The furthest row was near a fenced-off area. Most of the spots were filled with trucks and vans, like the other drivers who had also stopped to rest. I parked my car in a space closest to the main building since it had the most light and decided to get some rest. I had been asleep in the driver's seat for about an hour when I was suddenly startled awake by the sound of someone walking near my door. I looked over and I saw a guy starting to walk away. Then he turned around, saw that I was awake and looked at him. He gave a little wave and started walking back toward my car. He said, "Hey man, sorry to wake you, but my car won't start and I was wondering if you could give me a jump." I was half awake and for some reason I just kind of mumbled, "Sure, yeah, I guess so." He replied, "Great, follow me around here." This part was clearly a stupid decision on my part, but I'll continue nonetheless. So, I started my car and drove around to where he was walking. He led me to the far back row of the parking area, in the back corner near the fence. At this point, I was starting to realize just how shady the situation really felt. I stopped my car about halfway down the row thinking, just back up and drive off, this is dangerous. He saw that I had stopped and started waving at me to pull forward. For some stupid reason I did, but I kept my windows up and the doors locked. I also grabbed my phone and pepper spray from my carry bag on the passenger seat. As I pulled up, I saw an old beat-up RV parked next to an even more beat-up pickup truck, which was filled with garbage in the bed. The truck was facing the fence, with the back toward the parking row where I was. The guy was standing near the front of the truck, waving jumper cables and signaling for me to pull closer. The way that the truck or the RV was positioned, there was barely enough space for a car to squeeze between them. Suddenly, though, a woman stepped out of the RV and began signaling for me to pull up as well. At this point, I was completely suspicious and freaked out a bit. I shouted out the window, "No, I'm not pulling in there. If the cables can't reach, you'll have to find someone else." She got angry and started screaming at me to pull up, and then the guy ran over to her, yelling at her to shut up and get back inside the RV. He then walked over to the driver's side of my car and said, "Just pull up closer to the truck so I can hook the cables up and we'll be done." By that point, everything about the situation just felt off, and I said, "Nah, I'm not going to be able to help with this." He gave me an irritated look and said, "Seriously? I've got to get to my mother's house. She's not feeling too well, you know." I replied, "Look, I need to go, man," and started backing out of the parking area to leave the station. As I was pulling away, I saw the woman come back out of the RV and started shouting at the man, pointing toward my car. I couldn't tell what she was saying, but I got out of there quickly and I found another location closer to the city to spend the rest of the night. Now, I don't know if they genuinely needed help or if it was a setup for something more dangerous, but I immediately regretted the decisions that I made. It was clear to me pretty quickly that there was something sketchy going on and the situation could have taken a very bad turn very quickly. When I was in sophomore in college, I got a Facebook message once from a cousin that I didn't even know existed. He apparently lived in Belgium and was a second cousin on my mum's side. We're Sicilian. He was just a year older than me too, super friendly and spoke perfect English. He taught himself from listening to Eminem apparently. We were excited to reconnect as well, and invited him to come and stay with us in New Jersey for a few weeks. At first, everything was great. Dinners, hanging out with my friends, the usual. He was pale, thin, model-like, with jet black hair, but he got frustrated quickly when he realized all of my friends had boyfriends. That's when things turned a little bit weird. He started making inappropriate comments about my appearance, especially when I wore tight clothes. Things like, "I bet he just ripped those off of you." Then he started calling me some inappropriate names too. Even though I was dealing with a toxic on and off again sort of boyfriend at the time, I still knew at the time that this was inappropriate. It escalated when he sent me a childhood photo of myself in the bathtub and said, "Look, naked, and my name." I told my mum and she just brushed it off, saying that he was a weird European. I was pretty furious about that. So I began avoiding him, which was awkward because he was living with us. We fought more, and he said that I was only moving out to be promiscuous. It became emotionally exhausting in the end, and one night after a really bad fight, I missed my weekly call with my boyfriend in the army. I slammed my door, cried myself to sleep that night, and had an incredibly vivid dream that my house was haunted. I woke up at 3 a.m., heart racing, and seconds later, the glass frame hanging on my wall for years randomly crashed down on me. Suddenly, too, I started hearing music and water running from a faucet. I ended up sleeping on the floor in the living room that night, and the next morning at breakfast, my cousin smiled at me in this really eerie, knowing way. I said nothing, and, he was leaving in a few days anyway. After he left, though, the energy in my room was still off. Even during the day, I felt uneasy. I woke up at 3 in the morning every night, even if I went to bed at 1:30. One friend came over, walked into my room, and immediately said, "This room feels bad." She left shortly after. I finally decided to pull an all-nighter one night and go and see a priest the next day, and while doing my makeup, I looked down at my phone, and when I glanced back up, a giant handprint, larger than any human's, had appeared on my mirror, out of nowhere. Well, we called the priest immediately. He came and did a blessing, but during the prayer he was touched by something, and he said that the mirror was a portal apparently. He put holy water on it and said the energy was really intense, but instead of stopping, it seemed to get worse. A cup of pencils flew across my room at one point. My mum and I heard crashing noises throughout the night. My little brother started having dreams about monsters in my room. Then, my mum started receiving calls from my deceased father's old cell phone. No voice, just dead silence, and we tried tracing the number, but the line just didn't even exist anymore, so it should have been impossible. We had a second exorcism, and after that, finally it all stopped. No more disturbances and nothing else. But here's the weirdest part. So we went through the trash in the guest room after he left, and he had a receipt for a gospel CD and another package from a funeral home in Vermont, shipped through eBay apparently. It was £2 to £5, and we just never really figured out what it was. Also, my grandfather's religious statues in the room were turned to face the wall. My grandmother had started clutching her crucifix whenever she walked by. She always said that his eyes looked black. She also swore that he'd appear on random sides of the house faster than was physically possible, and my mum eventually called and demanded answers. He denied everything, and so in the end we blocked him. But months later, when I was at college, he showed up at my front door, all the way from Belgium. He looked strung out and had bloody scratches across his chest, and he said that he needed to confess something. My mum met him at a Starbucks with the priest, and again he denied everything. And that was the last time that we saw him. To this day, we really don't know what happened. He once said something like, "I sold my soul to be beautiful," and maybe he was joking, but now I'm just really not so sure. Summer is here, which means more sun, more light, and more time to do all the things that make summer so special. The number one thing that you don't want to be doing all summer, though, spending hours cooking inside. That's where Factor comes in. Factor's chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals are ready in just 2 minutes, taking all the hassle out of eating well. Factor meals arrive fresh and ready to eat, perfect for any active lifestyle over summer and beyond. With 45 weekly menu options, you can pick gourmet meals that fit your summer gains and goals. Choose from options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, Keto, and more. Factor powers your day sunup to sundown with nutritious breakfasts, on-the-go lunches, premium dinners, and even some guilt-free snacks and desserts. Factor has your whole day covered. Enjoy more this summer. Get Factor if you want all the flavor and none of the fuss. Me personally, I decided to try their protein range as I'm back at the gym this year. And not only has it really fit in with my schedule and made staying on track with my diet so much easier, but their chicken Florentine was absolutely delicious. That creamy garlic and chili cauliflower was incredible. I've used Factor meals for a little while now, and if you're busy like me and looking for easy, delicious meals that keep you on track, then you should definitely give them a go. So, get started at factormeals.com/scared50off and use code SCARED50off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. That's code SCARED50off at factormeals.com/scared50off for 50% off plus free shipping. factormeals.com/scared50off. So, I know that this is going to sound cheesy and fake, but last night on Friday the 13th, me and my boyfriend were spending some time together, and I thought, oh, let's go out to the woods by your dorm and look for some raccoons and possums and other critters, because we both love animals like that. We both agreed, and we went to grab some dinner, and then we went for a walk in the woods. It's about 10ish at this stage, and we're about 2 miles in, and I see this deer jump right over the path and into the bushes, and I say, oh, look, it's a deer. And he looks for a good 5 minutes, but doesn't see it. But I see it clear as day. After that, we continue, and we're about 4 to 5 miles deep into this trail when my boyfriend says, I run this trail every single morning, and I honestly have no clue where we are now. That kind of spooked me a bit because it's pitch black and he has no clue where we are, so we see this path that takes a right and we assume that it should loop around and take us back to the beginning so we can leave. I'm about maybe 2 to 4 feet ahead of him, and suddenly I just freeze in place with my phone flashlight pointing into the brush, and he comes around the corner and sees me and says, what's wrong? And I say, look, pointing my flashlight of my phone into the brush, and he looks down and I just say, look up. And he looks up and all you see are these bright blue humanoid eyes, about 9 feet up, staring at me. Whatever it was really skinny but so tall, and you can slowly see it scanning to me and then to him. I make eye contact with it for maybe a minute, until he grabs me and says, we need to go. And the second that he said that, this thing moves toward us in like this crooked movement. For what it's worth too, it's like a sort of grassy plain area with not many trees around in that area, just tall grass and some bushes and brush, but we walk slowly and I'm walking backwards. He has me by my wrist while he walks forwards, and you can just see this thing sort of stalking us until we take the left turn and retrace our steps back out of the woods. While we were walking or running, we then hear screaming and also like somebody praying. I really don't know what it was saying, but the weirdest thing is that when we left, my body just kept telling me to go back into the woods, and I couldn't stop tearing up while just staring at the woods when we got out of it, that is. Also, while we were leaving, there was this sort of loud shriek or howl or something. I know that this is speculation, but this is what he said. He said the name Skinwalker or Wendigo, and I also remembered that strange deer sighting that I saw in the woods that he didn't, and I don't know, but we smelled this super strong odor as well, and it got like dead quiet when we saw it, and the closer that we got to leaving that place, the louder the wildlife grew, so I don't know if that's related or not, but it sure was a terrifying experience. When I was 17, I had the most horrifying 3-ish months of my life. My mother asked me one day if I was angry when I'd come home because she kept hearing the basement door slam, apparently. My room was in the basement at the time. Honestly, I didn't think anything of it. Maybe I did slam the door hard on accident or something. Cut to later that night, though. I'm playing some game on the computer in the living room, listening to my music. My dad is asleep on the couch behind me. My mum was fast asleep as well in their bedroom, and I hear the basement door open and then slam. I take my earbud out to listen. My first thought was my sister randomly came home from college or something. Yet, even that was weird because it was like 12:30 in the morning. I'm listening and I hear the door open again and slam again. The door handle had a very distinct sound when it turned, and I hear both and I get up and begin to wake my dad up. I say, "Dad, someone's broken into the house, I think." He kind of brushes me away and sort of mumbles a bit as the door opens and slams again. Realizing that I was serious, my dad wakes up fully. I hand him the fire poker and I have the fire shovel, and we start to search the house. We search downstairs to find no one. The doors were locked, windows were locked. No one was there. We both just kind of weirded out, shrugged it off, and we went upstairs. And from there, this is where it starts getting even weirder and more unexplainable. The door slamming incident happened on a weekend, but the following Monday, after I got home from school, I went downstairs and started to watch some TV. I would get home a little after 4 p.m. and my parents wouldn't be home until like 5 or 5:30. I'm sitting there watching some TV when I hear loud, heavy, distinct footsteps coming from upstairs. I thought that my mum had gotten off of work early, so I go upstairs to talk to her, but she's not there. In fact, no one is. I look around, bathroom, her bedroom, outside even. Her van wasn't even in the driveway. Weird, I thought, and I just went back downstairs. But the second that I get back downstairs, I hear it again, loud, like heavy boots now. This time I don't go up, and I sit there and listen as the footsteps go throughout the house. My parents' bedroom is right above mine, and I can hear their floor creaking. The next day, it was the same thing too. I come home from school, I hear the footsteps, only this time I hear my name being called too. Now, my mum would always yell down to me, so I went up, but there was no one home but me. Later that night too, I was watching TV and I heard my name being called again. It sounded like it started at the top of the stairs and came into my room as well. And man, I had full body chills and I just sat there quietly, not sure what to do. I then spoke to my then girlfriend at the time about it. I told her what had happened so far and how I'm hearing my name called. She kind of believed me, I guess, and well, maybe a day or so after, we were in my room and she would come and pick me up for school, and sometimes we just wouldn't go, but anyway, this was one of those times, and I'd fallen asleep for like an hour or so, and I wake up to her next to me, and she just has this worried look about her. I ask her if she's okay. She just sort of looks at me with that same face. I said, "You heard something, didn't you?" And she replied with, "Yes, I heard your name twice." So at this point, the footsteps and the name being called became pretty much an everyday occurrence as well. So much so, in fact, that in the end it just didn't even bother me anymore. One morning, though, my girlfriend had gotten there to pick me up for school one day. I'm waking up and she asks, "What happened to your glass?" Confused, I ask her what she meant, and she said, "Look at it." Now, my sister had worked at a brewery and had gotten me one of those super thick glass beer mugs. It's a nice cup and I always drank out of it. I had some pop in it the night before and I drank it all and sat the glass down on my nightstand table. Now, when I go to investigate this mug, it was completely cut in half. And I'm talking like laser beam, samurai sword cut in half, at about a 45-degree angle, and you could still pick up the top half and the bottom was still there too. Another morning, I had a dream that somebody was running their fingers through my hair and on my forehead. When my girl got there to pick me up, she asked, "What's on your forehead?" Because apparently, 3 scratches from the top part of my hairline almost down to my nose had appeared. I just continued to get ready for school, but she's chilling in my room and we both hear my cell ringing. I'm holding my then sweet flip phone at the time and it's not making any noise though. And yet we're both hearing it. Remember back in the day when you had like to download ringtones and all that? Well, that's what I had for my ringer, and it was a song that we both knew, and we looked around the basement still hearing the song, and as we got closer to a wall, we could hear it coming from inside of it. Well, that was weird and enough for us, and we left after that. Keep in mind, too, that I'm still hearing all the normal stuff daily, plus all of this. Another incident, too, my buddy and I and my girlfriend's brother stayed the night, and we chilled, played video games. Nothing out of the ordinary happened, but we wake up to her brother yelling about something. He was asleep on the couch in the living room part of the basement, and At the foot of the couch sat a table that we had gotten from my great-grandmother or something, square top with a hexagon cylinder to the base, a heavy-duty, overbuilt table, really. The legs of the table were still sitting there, but the top and the midsection are roughly 15 feet away. Jokingly, I asked him if he had drop-kicked that in the middle of the night or something, and he says no, he didn't hear anything, and he's a super light sleeper. I start to look at the base of the table, and I can see how it's fastened to the top, and there's 4 screws and 4 wood pegs that were glued in. Mind you, the weirdest thing about this was that there was nothing broken, nothing was bent, nothing to confirm that he had kicked it in the middle of the night or anything. Plus, the table was so well built that it would have just tipped over instead of dismantling like this. Quite honestly, it was as if the top was just lifted straight off and then sort of thrown. Well, later that same day, the 3 of us are about to go outside to shoot some hoops at one point. I'm first walking up, her brother behind me, then my buddy. I'm almost at the top of the stairs, and her brother pushes me out of the way and runs out of the house. My buddy and I just kind of look at each other, sort of confused. We go outside to find him visibly shaken, almost in tears in fact. "Yo, what's wrong, dude?" We ask him, as he begins to tell us that he got a really weird feeling and had to turn around, and when he did, he says that he saw a huge orb coming up the stairs behind my buddy. A few days after that last occurrence as well, I'm watching TV in my room and I hear footsteps upstairs and hear them coming towards the basement. The footsteps continue coming down the stairs while I sit there with my TV muted, and they stop. Hearing nothing for what felt like maybe 20 seconds, I then see a large shadow appear on my wall. Not really the shape of like a humanoid or anything, but just like a big mass of shadow. I immediately sunk into my couch, looking behind me as quick as I could to see nothing. My door was still even closed. This was the first time that I had ever seen anything, and after that, it began to show itself a little bit more too. I would see movement out of the corner of my eye, things moving slightly here and there. Then one night, the thing that scared me the most happened. I came home from a friend's house, probably around 1 a.m. or so. It was late, and I could hear both my parents sleeping, snoring away. I'm in the kitchen nuking up some leftover pizza, and a strange feeling just suddenly came over me that I needed to walk into the living room. I then hear in my mum's voice someone say, "Where's he at?" I sort of freeze. I literally could not move my body for like a solid minute. My mind could not comprehend how I just heard what I had heard. Sure, people sleep talk, but it's usually mumbled and sort of incoherent, right? This was very clear and completely audible, as if she was sitting right there and said that. I finally am able to just back into the kitchen, and I make it downstairs. And from there on, the activity continues, but weirdly, it starts to slow down. No more voices, footsteps become rare, anything odd simply seems to stop. And I mean, for a solid couple of months, there was like daily intense activity, and then one day it all just sort of randomly stopped. Everything went back to normal, and my friends and I never talked about it again. My parents, my girlfriend, and 2 friends, including myself, all experienced something during that time. And quite honestly, I've never been able to explain any of the events. I sort of pride myself on being a pretty logical person and believe a lot of paranormal experiences can just be explained by some other thing. But in this case, I have experienced firsthand things that I just can honestly not understand. Before I start this, I just want to note that I live in the Appalachians and I have a working carbon monoxide detector too. Now, normally I let my 2 cats sleep in my bed, You occasionally sort of feel them and hear them. You sort of hear them walking around, rearranging like normal and all that. But a few days ago, I had emergency surgery, and after coming home and laying down to rest, because I need to lay in a specific way and I'm in a lot of pain, I went ahead and kept both of my cats out of the bedroom and closed the door. And then I ended up having an experience where I was laying on my side facing the wall in the dresser, and behind my back in the center of the bed, I could clearly feel slight indentations on the bed from what I thought felt like paw steps, whether a dog or a cat or something else, but I waited for a bit to see if it would stop. I then felt it go down below my feet and start coming up on the other side in front of me, so before it got that high, I spoke out and said, "Please just leave me alone. I'm trying to heal after surgery and I'm in pain." The steps stopped for maybe 30 seconds before starting back up again. I then turned the flashlight on my phone, and I flashed the entire room, just to make sure that nobody had actually snuck in. There's nothing visible in the room, so I turn the flashlight back off, and I say out loud, "You're not welcome here right now. I need my rest and to work on my recovery, and this will not help me feel better. Can you please leave now?" And surprisingly, whatever it was, it stopped. Then, this morning, I'm telling my boyfriend about the encounter the previous night, and as I'm going through and describing everything in detail, all of a sudden I had no headache previously, but I'm suddenly slammed with severe pain right in my temples. I then tell him how strange that is, and I suddenly have pain in my temples, and I feel like this might be causing it. I don't think it wants us to talk about it, and he then said to me, with a kind of spooked look on his face, at the same time that I was telling him about it, that he also got this severe pain in his temples too. Anyway, I didn't want the pain to continue, so I just said out loud again that I'm sorry I spoke about you again. I'll stop talking about you. I said this out loud, and amazingly, the pain for both of us instantly went away. I have no clue what this is, but that's why I'm here. Do any of you guys know what the heck that I'm dealing with here? To start this off, when I was a kid, my parents ended up getting a divorce, so my brothers and I ended up staying with my dad on weekends and my mum on school days. My dad, he ended up finding a partner and they quickly got a house together. She also had 2 kids, so me and my brothers had a room and her kids got a room as well. The house was nice, but it was really cheap to be what it was, and it was out in the country and in a really secluded area as well. That's how it usually goes with these stories, right? Anyway, it had a decent amount of land and an old barn on it. The barn was strange thinking on it now that I'm older. There were a lot of bird cages along with like tools and knives in there. My dad ended up getting rid of most of it. Possibly unrelated, but I'll mention it anyway, is that down the hill there was a fire pit surrounded by a circle of like crystallized rocks that were clearly out of place. As a kid, my first reaction was to sort of bust open all the rocks with my brothers to see if there were any fossils inside. If anyone knows why they would be there, then I'm open to ideas because I've always wondered why someone would do that. It was too far away from the fire pit to have anything to do with the fire, to be honest, but I don't know, maybe I'm just overthinking it. Anyways, after a few months, my dad and his partner, they ended their relationship and she and her kids moved out, so their room stayed empty and the door stayed shut, and the next few weeks went by fine. One weekend, though, we were getting ready for bed, and my dad always put on some banjo music to help us sleep at night. That was really the only thing they picked up out there on the radio, but I fell asleep only to wake up a few hours later, fully energized and also with cold sweats. The radio had a lot of static on it, which was a bit uncommon for that station, but I thought that it could have been the clouds or something like that, and I didn't think too much of it. Eventually, I got up to use the bathroom and got to the hallway, and I started hearing the sound of like boots walking in a circle rapidly in the empty room, and there was really nothing in it that could cause that sound. I was maybe 5 feet away from the door, so I could hear it clearly. I instantly froze in fear, just staring at the door too. After a few minutes, it just stops and everything got so quiet. All of a sudden, though, that bedroom door just swings open, and I hear the boots rushing towards me. I instantly panicked and fell on my butt and quickly picked myself up, and I ran to my dad's room. I woke my dad up and told him that somebody had broken in. He jumps out of bed and grabs his shotgun, then runs through the whole house, eventually checking all the windows and the doors, and everything was locked, and no one was there. He eventually got mad realizing that nothing was there, and he blamed it on the video games that I play, though I haven't had any experiences like that ever or since then too. After a year or two, though, I got really into the paranormal, and I shared the experience with one of my brothers. First time that I'd ever really told anyone that story. And to my surprise, he said that he definitely thinks that something was wrong with that house because he had a story of his own too. So when he lived with Dad at the time, he told me that one night he got up because he was hearing chains being dragged across the front porch. He went to check it out, but my dad was already at the front door with the light off and with a shotgun in his hand. He just looked at my brother and said that it's okay and to go back to sleep. My dad never believed in the paranormal. Well, at least he acted like he didn't, but I started to think that he was only saying these things to keep us from getting scared or worried. I still get cold chills just thinking about this whole experience, and it's something that I don't think that I'll ever forget. This happened a few days ago. Where I live, we have a lot of parks, but as two teenage girls going to hang out with guys, me and my friends obviously picked the biggest one where there's more to do and less people around. For some context too, I'll just say that this park is down the street from a few halfway houses and work releases for recently released criminals, and a lot of the time, the ones who get the days out and don't have anywhere to go end up at this park, just to have some time away, I guess. Which means that, more likely than not, me and my friends go to hang out or do things that teenagers shouldn't be doing, and there's already a few tweakers and sketchy people there that we have to watch out for. Anyway, this day in particular, the guys that we were with were boring us more than usual, so we were just sitting on the sidewalk talking and halfway sort of listening to them when a girl walked up to us. While I'm not naive or stupid, especially in this park, and especially where I live, I mean, I'm a girl and I won't turn away from a young girl who was crying, upset, missing her shoes and phone, I'm still pretty cautious. The girl asked me if she could use my phone to make a call. I, of course, had the thought that she might just run away with the phone, but again, I'd rather help if she actually needed it than not. So I offer her to use my phone, and she holds it for a few minutes, before beginning to cry again because she cannot remember anyone's number or something. I tell her that it's okay, and she begins to sort of break down and tell us how she doesn't seem to remember what happened to her last night. She tells us that she was with a man and went out for drinks to just have some fun when all of a sudden he got very angry and she can't remember anything that happened after that, just being found in a parking lot really, and being taken to a local hospital where she was treated for a head injury and very obvious bruises all over her body. She said that they refused to give her an R kit and they dropped her off at this park because she didn't remember how to get home. She kept apologizing and saying that she didn't mean to ruin our day, but at this point, me and my friend no longer cared about the guys that we were with, just about getting this poor girl some help. So I offered to call 911, and she shares concern of how the police, they won't care because she's a woman of color, and look, I can sort of understand that being one myself, and we got her some blankets and food and whatever she needed, and promised that we would take her to the hospital instead of calling an ambulance, mostly because I knew that she didn't want to deal with the police again or get into another ambulance right away. So we said that we would lobby for her and stay with her the entire time, but she didn't love the idea, and I could tell that she was getting sort of agitated and almost aggressive toward us too. This was the first red flag. When my friend left to go and get her car from across the park, she sort of shared with me that she was scared that they would put her back into the psych ward, which I didn't know the story and I couldn't promise that they wouldn't. I could only promise that we would go with her and stay as much as we were allowed to. But she kept crying and asking us to take her to a local store. So we, not wanting to upset her more than what she already was, and make it worse for her, decided to just take her there. The store was only a few miles away from the park that we were at, so it was no big deal, but the whole ride the girl kept sort of digging in her bag, and that's when I realized that I felt a little bit uneasy about the situation. She didn't seem to take her hand out of the bag the whole 7-minute ride, and until we got there she seemed to be sort of staring at me and almost talking to herself. I didn't think much of it because she had gone through a traumatic experience and I wasn't going to minimize this. On arrival, though, to the store, she instructs us to take her to the back of the store where the two men are waiting. She gets out of the car and runs towards the men crying and breaking down, but the man stands still, not making any moves to comfort her or showing any empathy. Honestly, too, I thought that that would be normal in this sort of situation. Well, we got out of the car to go and explain the situation to these guys, and I've never seen someone care so little about someone that they apparently know. This man was gripping her wrists and not even looking at her. This was the second red flag. At this point, I already knew that something just wasn't right and that this man wasn't going to give this girl any help. When the friend finished explaining the situation, the man starts to say that they were going to take good care of the situation and if we wanted, we could come with. While we did say that we were going to stay, I didn't see the point anymore and I didn't want to go with this man, and I think it was obvious to my friend too. My friend said that we could follow in our car if they needed someone to explain to the hospital, but the man insists that we all take his car, which is a smaller car and definitely not big enough to fit all of us. He gives the girl a sort of look and she starts walking back toward us, mentioning how we said that we would stay with her, and she's not actually crying anymore, but just making the face like she is. And when we kept saying that we could go with her in our car, the girl reached for my friend and started getting aggressive and yelling at her. She's holding my friend's arm at this point and not letting her go. I start trying to get her to let go of my friend's arm, who is obviously freaking out a little, and this girl is just yelling and screaming in her face. The man starts saying to me, how is he supposed to believe that we weren't a part of it, and we probably hurt the girl, and we're just bringing her back now, and we needed to go with him. He then grabs my arm and starts trying to pull me towards the car without making a scene, and even though I was scared, I'm certainly not a person to freeze under pressure, so I start pulling back, trying to get away from this man. But I'm certainly not very strong for a teenager, and this man is definitely going to get me into this car, but before he could, my friend pushes the girl's arm off of her and just starts to absolutely scream. The kind of scream that only comes from a teenage girl and the kind that gets people to look quickly. The man suddenly drops my arm and pushes me away and drags the girl from the park into his car before driving off and leaving us standing in the parking lot. At this point, we were freaking out, and so we get into the car quickly. We don't know what to do, and stupidly, I'm still worried about this girl in the park because I don't think that my mind really wrapped around the fact that she was trying to get us into that car with that man. We called 911 and explained the whole situation from the start, even the beginning of the story of the girl, and they said that they would get back to us with some information. We've gotten a few calls from the police in the last few days, and the summary of the story that we got from them is that The woman that we had tried to help had been at the hospital the night before, but not for what she had said. She was there because she was found having mental health problems, which was apparently common for her, as well as being brought in for drug abuse. The man in the parking lot, however, was not her boyfriend or her family member. They apparently checked on cameras, and they still don't know who he was to her, and just that he had been charged with aggravated kidnapping on multiple occasions. So, quite honestly, I think that we got very lucky that day. This experience, ever since it happened, has been driving me absolutely insane, and I desperately need some kind of clarity. Nothing describing this specific experience is coming up when I'm looking into it, so I caved, and I thought that I would come here in hopes that someone can explain my experience, or at least had a similar one to share. So, I, 19 and male, just moved into a new flat today, and it's been quite disastrous, to be honest. The flat wasn't cleaned or cleared, there was a problem with the lease, and my belongings now aren't coming till tomorrow, etc. And so I spent the day majorly stressed and really upset. I called a friend of mine, 20 and male, to complain a bit, and he was nice enough to go out of his way to visit so that we could get some food together and so I wouldn't be alone. It was also my first night alone, as my flatmate now isn't moving in for like a whole nother week. The nerves and the uncertainty of a new place put us both a little bit on edge. The place was furnished, but predominantly empty, given that my stuff isn't here yet, so it was a tad spooky. Because of this, when it was time for us to go to bed, we decided to just sleep in my bed together at that stage. It was around 3:30 in the morning, and I woke up to see my friend stood by the open wardrobe, clutching his arms around himself as if he was cold. It was dark, but I could clearly make out the figure, and it wasn't a shadow or a silhouette or anything. It was a full defined person, and it was definitely him. He was wearing the pajamas that he went to bed in, and I could make out the Scooby-Doo logo on the back of his shirt. I know, Scooby-Doo pajamas, right? I could also see his face and could tell that his head was turned to look at me, despite his body facing away. We had joked earlier in the day about a stained and smelly duvet the previous tenants had left behind, and about how we may have to use it for warmth as a last resort, as all I had with me, given my missing belongings, was a throw blanket. Given that the dirty duvet was sat in front of the wardrobe, I assumed that he had had enough of the chilly room and had woken up to go and grab it. I sort of laughed and said something like, "Take it you cave to the cold?" He said nothing and just sort of kept looking at me. So I made another joke, assuming that he didn't hear me properly, and he did the same thing, just stared at me. So I called his name, and when I got no response verbally or physically, I called it repeatedly, gradually getting louder and more frightened. It was then that I was met with a response, but not from the figure by the wardrobe, but from my friend who was still lying beside me in the bed, annoyed now that I had woken him up. I was too busy looking at the wardrobe to notice that my friend was still in bed right next to me the whole time. I looked between both of them, the figure staring at me and my friend who was still in bed looking at me, except with a hoodie on over his Scooby-Doo shirt. I obviously started freaking out, and I shook my friend to try to get him to look at the wardrobe, but as I was looking at the figure, it just started to fade away, I guess is the best way to describe it. My friend turned on the light, but he saw nothing. In speaking to my friend, I've learned that it might not have even been a spirit attached to the flat, but rather one attached to him. Apparently, he's seen similar apparitions since he was a kid, usually differing in appearance, sometimes taking the form of family and friends, but always staring and always stood somewhere in the room late at night. The apparition, it seems to follow him wherever he goes, not tied to any sort of building, but rather to him. He says that he knows that it's not sleep paralysis because he can always move when he sees it. He says that the spirit has also appeared to family and friends before, often when he shares a bed with them in the same way that it appeared to me. So I suppose that that could be it. I'm not sure, I'm just a bit concerned given that it's my first night here and literally that I've just moved into a haunted flat or something. My friend also says that the attached ghost has never taken the form of him before and that seems to be concerning him a bit. I've heard that doppelgangers like that are an omen for bad luck or something, which doesn't surprise me to be honest, given my horrific luck as of late. But now I'm just really confused and quite startled. I don't really know what it was that I saw to be honest, but I know that I do not want to stay here alone now. I had a look at a few familiar posts in a subreddit and I saw that sometimes entities like that feed on stress and fear, and I shouldn't really panic when I see them so I don't give them power or whatever, but I think to do that I need to understand a bit more, so any advice is very much appreciated. And also, is there any way to get rid of whatever this is? I've dealt with sleep paralysis since my teens, and by now I'm familiar with the routine. The frozen body, the weight on my chest, the looming sense that I'm not alone. But there was one incident about 2 years ago that still unsettles me every time that I think about it. It was different. Something spoke to me in a way that I've never felt or experienced before. It started like most of my episodes. I was asleep in bed and became suddenly aware that I couldn't move. I was lying on my side facing the far side of the room, with my back to the rest of the bed. But I knew that something was next to me. I could feel it. And then I saw it. There was a tall, thin, pitch-black figure standing directly beside me. No facial features, no glowing eyes, just a void in the shape of an eerily stretched person, darker than the darkness of the room itself. The curtains were slightly cracked, letting in a soft line of natural light from outside, but somehow that only made the figure more visible. It was as if the absence of light had taken on form and weight almost. And then it started speaking. The voice was deep, heavy and fast. The language, I cannot even begin to describe it. I've never heard anything like it. It wasn't gibberish either. It was fluent, intentional. It had a rhythm. It seemed articulate with chunky, sort of harsh, intentional sounds that carried this electric-like feel, almost like the words were being charged with something, vibrating in the air around me. I felt as though this thing was giving me some sort of instructions. As to what they could be, I have absolutely no idea. I was frozen. In typical sleep paralysis style, I couldn't move an inch. I couldn't even whisper, a scream, or anything. But despite the fear, and I was absolutely terrified, the strongest emotion running through me was rage. Just pure fury. I wanted to attack it, to hurt it, which is strange because in most sleep paralysis episodes, I just sort of feel fear or confusion. This time, though, I felt like I was ready to fight for my life or something. The figure, it kept speaking, though, fast, intentional, and deep, until suddenly I heard as clear as day a voice in my own head. Not in the language that the figure was speaking, but a different, human-like one. Neutral, commanding, almost like narration. And now you can wake up. And just like that, I jolted awake, soaked in sweat, heart racing like I'd sprinted a mile. I quickly looked around, but the room was empty, silent. I was alone. I asked ChatGPT to recreate the image for me, using pictures of my actual room as a reference, and this is what it generated. which is very close to what I experienced when in the sleep paralysis state. I have had other sleep paralysis episodes. I've seen other black figures, sometimes tall, sometimes short. Once I even felt myself flying toward the ceiling, only to wake up just before impact. I've been diagnosed with something called exploding head syndrome, where I'll shift from a dream straight into sleep paralysis state with an intense, painful vibration that almost feels like my skull is about to burst. It honestly hurts so much too that every time that it happens, I'm convinced that I'm about to die, until I suddenly snap awake, crawling with pins and needles, the pain gone like it never even happened. And look, I'm not saying that this wasn't sleep paralysis. It had all the hallmarks of it, but this experience just felt weird. The speaking, the language, the sort of weird message. I've never experienced anything like it before or since then. It is the one experience that has always stuck with me. I'm a 25-year-old female, and this happened about 8 to 9 years ago. I would have been around 16 to 17 years old at that point. So, I'm from a small village, and I went to school in the nearest big city, which was about 40 kilometers away, or 25 miles. Because public transportation was so bad, just to get home I had to change buses twice, and if I missed the last transfer and my parents weren't home, then I really had no way to get home unless they came for me, or I had to walk like 4 kilometers or 2.5 miles. I lived in a dormitory during the week in the city where I studied. So I stayed in the city during this week and went home on Fridays, then back again on Sundays, and I always got off at the bus at the main station when I arrived in the city, around 2 p.m. My boyfriend, who came from another town, also studied in the city. He came by train, and every Sunday I waited for him at the station for about an hour and a half, and then we would always go to the dormitory together. That day was different, though. I was waiting for him, sitting upstairs at the station, in a spot where I could see the entire ground floor from above. I had my headphones in and my phone on, just sort of sitting there, when out of the corner of my eye I noticed a homeless woman wandering around. She sometimes stood still and sort of looked around, but I didn't pay too much attention to her. There are a lot of homeless people in this area after all. Time passed, I was still sitting, headphones on, phone in hand. Then I saw the homeless woman start walking in my direction. I still didn't think too much of it. When she was about a few feet away from me, I noticed that she was talking to other people who were sitting nearby, probably asking for money or something. A few moments later, she started walking toward me again. I saw her, but I didn't lift my head. Then she stopped in front of me. That's when I looked up. She just stared at me. Her eyes looked like she was high on something, and she was also slightly swaying. She was dirty, honestly disgusting to look at. Some green liquid was dripping from the corner of her mouth, and her face was really dirty. She wore a thick coat, grey pants, black boots, even though it was spring, and had a black backpack as well. She had short brown hair, brown eyes, looked around 40, though she could have been younger. I saw her lips moving. She was talking to me. I took out my headphones and gave her my attention. I'm not a rude person, and I always try to speak kindly to people, but when I removed my headphones, she went silent and just stared at me. Sorry, could you say that again? I didn't hear you, I asked her. Then she spoke again, but again I didn't understand a single word, just mumbling. She stared at me with those glassy eyes. I shook my head. Sorry, I don't understand what you're saying, I told her and looked at her. At this point, I felt my heart beating quickly, and I suddenly became scared. I didn't know what she wanted, and something about her made me really uncomfortable. She started mumbling again, and while she mumbled, she began searching for something in her coat pocket with her right hand. I looked down at her hand to see what she was doing or what she wanted from me. At this point, I thought maybe she just needed some help with something. I looked back up into her eyes and waited to see what was going to happen. That's when I saw her pull her hand out of her coat, and I looked down at her hand again, and she was still mumbling. And that was when I saw a piece of glass in her hand. She slowly slid it under her coat to her forearm, holding the sharp end in her palm. It was pretty big, sharp, probably around 15 centimeters or 6 inches. That's when I realized that something was very wrong. My eyes suddenly widened. I was scared. I asked her one last time, a bit more irritated now, "What do you want from me?" I knew that there were people around me, and it was a train station in broad daylight after all, so I didn't think that she would actually do anything. Well, suddenly she stepped toward me and pushed the glass toward me, toward my neck. I reacted immediately. I jumped up in time, pushed her away, and yelled at her, "What the heck are you doing?" She started mumbling more angrily. I still had no idea what she was saying, but now my whole body was shaking and I was terrified. I grabbed my travel bag quickly, all while keeping my eyes on her. She was still mumbling angrily, holding the glass shard in front of her, staring at me. "Leave me alone," I shouted at her again, and I did this as I rushed off. I also saw that everyone at the station was now watching us. I ran outside of the station and saw some police officers nearby. I felt relieved. I walked toward them, but I didn't say anything. I knew that if I told them that they'd probably just tell her to leave, and really that would be it. So in the end, I just chose to stay close to them. A few moments later, I saw the woman outside too, and she was walking in my direction, angrily looking at me. I didn't see the glass in her hand anymore, but I grabbed my bag and I walked to a different part of the station courtyard where she couldn't see me. I was trembling, scared, and quite honestly in shock. Thankfully, though, I never did see her again. A bit later, my boyfriend arrived, and I told him what happened. He was surprised and worried too. He told me to never wait for him at the station again after that, and I didn't. From that point on, I always waited for him at the dormitory. Even now, every time that I go to that station, which is rare these days, I still get anxious and always stay alert. I still live in that city now, even after finishing school, and I'm still with my boyfriend and we live together. But just knowing what could have happened there if I hadn't have reacted in time or if I had just ignored her, it still scares me a lot. This happened to me in August of 2024, during the middle of a gloomy Melbourne winter. It still gives me chills to think about it too. For context, I had just started a new job and was working from home while being trained over Microsoft Teams. My husband was at work, about 45 kilometers away, and I was completely alone in the new house. We had only moved in a couple of months prior, into a developing suburb, which means that at that point the street was practically deserted. Just one neighbor beside me and another one all the way at the end of the road. Everyone else, well, they were just empty lots and half-built houses. Now, at around 3 p.m., although still daytime, it was already pretty dark due to the thick winter clouds that day. I was sitting in our theater room, which faces the front of the house. The blinds were partially shut, not enough for full privacy, but enough that you'd need to look closely to see in. When out of nowhere, I hear a knock. Not a doorbell, but just knocking. That was odd too, because door-to-door salespeople usually ring, and I wasn't expecting any parcels. And for some reason I still cannot explain, I got this immediate uneasy feeling and checked our security cameras. And standing there was a huge shirtless man, clearly high or drunk or something. swaying, aggressive, and peering directly right through the narrow glass panels on my front door. When I didn't respond, he started banging louder and louder and yelling for me to open up. The aggression was escalating fast. Thank God that we had security screen doors installed, but even with that barrier, I was panicking. I was home alone, no one else was nearby, and help was not going to come quickly. I tried to keep calm, but then he wandered to a nearby construction site, grabbed a huge piece of wood, and began smashing it against my security door. That was it. I called the cops, and they could hear the banging on the call and immediately told me to get into the master bedroom, lock that door, then get into the ensuite bathroom and lock that too. That way there'd be 2 locked doors between me and this guy in case he actually made it inside. The next 20 minutes, man, were they the longest 20 minutes of my life. He didn't give up. He moved to the side gate and tried climbing over it, which leads directly to the back of my house. I have glass sliding doors back there too, and it hit me. They would be easy to break. I rushed to shut the roller shutters. As they were coming down, he saw them too, and he completely lost it. He began pounding on those now furiously, completely unhinged. Then, finally, sirens. The police arrived, saw his car parked all crooked in front of my house, noticed the muddy footprints, and immediately jumped the side gate. They caught him mid-rage at my back door. He was detained, but because of the local laws here, people under the influence have to be medically sobered up before arrest, so the cops aren't liable if anything happens while they're high. So they called an ambulance, took him away, and also towed his car. A cop returned to my door later to explain the situation. Apparently, this guy was completely out of his mind and had mistaken my house for a drug house. There was one all the way down the street that had some shady activity apparently, and he thought that mine was it. I still remember calling my neighbor during all this and telling her not to open the door no matter what because she has 2 small kids and I didn't want anyone else getting hurt. This whole experience, though, it left me shaken for weeks. I still cannot express how grateful I am that my husband had insisted on installing roller shutters and reinforced security doors when we moved in. Because if we hadn't, well, I don't even want to think about it. I work for a doctor's office that is situated beside a hospital nearly a century old now. The building that I work in was built 10 years ago and is 3 stories of assorted specialists and doctors' offices that aren't associated with the hospital really. Behind it is the emergency room, which is actually older than the hospital itself. I'm not surprised about the hospital or the emergency area being haunted, to be honest. It holds a great amount of history, so I could expect that there to be a lot of spirits roaming around those buildings. But I never expected those spirits to drift over to my office building, which has to be at least 50 feet away. Now, my first experience happened in early morning hours 6 months ago. It wasn't quite 8 o'clock when the lobby door knob rattled loudly, and I watched the door, expecting a patient to walk in, and even went to check the hallway when nobody walked in. Since we are the only doctor's office on the 3rd floor, and this hallway is really long, there's really nowhere that someone could hide either. This happened a few times that morning before the first patient of the day came in. Later, as I was telling my co-workers about the odd rattling, an appointment card lifted from the card holder flipped in the air and landed in front of us on the desk. None of us had an explanation for it, and it has never happened since then. After that, I began hearing voices in the stairwell too. It always sounded like somebody mumbling downstairs, but there would never be anyone down there. Other times I'd hear footsteps and no one would be taking the stairs but me. My co-workers heard it as well, so we knew that we weren't going crazy. One coworker once had the lobby television turn on randomly and just sort of flip channels and then turn back off. The remote was in a sort of cubby area, and it's an older TV, so there's just no way that someone could have turned it on by app or anything. There's no one else in the office too, since it was lunchtime. There have been times too when the office chairs would just sort of roll out of their stations. We've all witnessed it happening. A couple of times the coffee table in the lobby had been moved even, and we've heard the sound of it moving both times. But this evening was the scariest of all. So I was the last in my office to leave, and the storms had been raging all afternoon, so I opted to take the stairs on the opposite end of the hallway that day. It was maybe about 3/4 of the way that I suddenly hear these rapid footsteps behind me. I knew that there was no one else in the hallway, but I looked behind me anyway, and the steps came to a quick stop. It made me nervous, and I picked up the pace. I was halfway down the stairs, just past the second floor, when the door on the third landing banged open and shut hard. I'll admit that I screamed. I waited a few seconds, mostly out of fear. Then I ran down those steps quickly. The third floor door crashed open again as I got to the first landing, and I could have sworn that I heard footsteps again, but they could have been mine echoing at that point, I admit. I literally ran out of the building. Tomorrow, I also have to go in early, and I'll be alone for at least 30 minutes. Worst too is that there's going to be storms again, and I'm going to have to use those stairs. So, wish me luck. This happened when I, male and 33 now, was 16 years old. I didn't get my driver's license till I was 18, but my friend, his name was Gary, got his. Now, we lived in a pretty small town in North Carolina, the type of town where all the high school kids, me included at the time, hung out in the Walmart parking lot, because really there was nothing better to do. So me and Gary had been friends since the beginning of high school, met in one of our classes in freshman year. Gary was into spooky stuff, and so was I. Not long after getting his license too, he comes to me with an idea. He tells me about some apparently old abandoned insane asylum a few towns over. Says that it's back in the woods somewhere, and isn't even visible from the roads anymore. He wants us all to go out there in the middle of the night and check it out, because it's supposed to be haunted by the patients that died there or something like that. Of course, though, no one wants to go with him but me. So the following weekend, we decided that we're going to sneak out and check this place out. It takes us a while to get there and figure out where exactly this place is, but finally we find the place when we park the car and follow the trail up to the asylum. We arrive at a really old building. I'm not sure if it was actually an asylum or just some building, but it was definitely old and had plants growing all over it. It's possible a sign for the place was somewhere hidden in the brush, but I never looked. In any case, we walk into the building. There was no door. The inside is covered in graffiti, all kinds of stuff, some kind of funny and others a bit disturbing. The place definitely felt and looked spooky. We didn't end up staying long too. We had been inside maybe 10 minutes or so, exploring the few rooms near the front of the building, when suddenly a loud bang goes off. Not a gunshot bang, but something like really heavy fell to the floor or something. Me and Gary, we both freeze. We turn to look at the doorway of the room that the noise came from at the end of the hallway, and a wheelchair slowly rolled into view from the room. In this wheelchair is an old doll. If you know what a Raggedy Ann doll is, then picture that, because that's basically what this was. Well, that was enough for me and Gary. We decided to just head back to the car at this stage. We're walking back to the car through the trail, and we're both obviously scared, but neither of us want to show it or admit it. But as we're walking, we hear something move around in the woods. Me and Gary don't speak a word to each other or even look at each other. We both immediately just take off running. And whatever it was that we heard, it started chasing us. In fact, we could hear it running in the woods next to us the whole time. Thankfully, we made it back to the car in one piece, and as soon as we got inside, we took off. We didn't look back, and we never actually saw what was after us that day. For all we know, it may have been coincidental and just some animal, but something tells me inside that it wasn't. Looking back at this now, I'm not sure what's actually scarier, the fact that we possibly ran into a ghost or a spirit, or that maybe we weren't alone out there. Fair warning before I begin. I'm not sure if this would be Bigfoot related or not exactly, but I'm also investigating whether or not it could be or not. This is for all you folks in around Pike County, Indiana. I once shared a story about my personal encounter with the unknown, this being the only possible paranormal experience that I've ever had, but anyway, I digress. I had an experience a while back that I just haven't been able to shake since then, and I'm wondering if anyone here has seen anything similar. So late one night, maybe around 2009 to 2010, on a rural road outside near Pike County, Indiana, I saw something that really just doesn't match anything that I've ever heard of. I wasn't alone too. My cousins were with me and they saw it too. It was a figure walking upright, on two legs, no doubt about that. It wasn't huge, probably about my height or a little shorter, but extremely skinny and completely pitch black, almost like it absorbed light around it. But the part that's always stuck with me the most were the eyes. They were glowing bright blue, not reflected like an animal eyes in the headlights. These looked like they had their own light source, full-on icy blue. It didn't growl or make any sound. It didn't seem scared or aggressive or anything. It just sort of, looked at us like it acknowledged us, then walked across the road and into the woods like we weren't even there. We were all frozen for a second, and then I just said, "Did you guys just see that?" And they both said yes, and after that we left. Now, I'm not claiming anything supernatural here or anything, but I lived in Pike County a long time, and I've never seen anything like this. Not a bear or a bobcat, not anything local that could explain it, at least. And quite honestly, I've never heard anyone talk about bright blue eyes on anything. And so I figured that I would ask you guys and see if anyone knows anything about this. It was midsummer in 2024. I lived in a small town in Oregon at the time. In January 2024, I got evicted from a house where I lived with my mum and 3 siblings. We struggled to sell the house in the last upcoming days to our eviction, and we just never found a place to stay, so we resorted to living in an RV with 1 bedroom. The RV, it was broken down and unregistered as well, so we were forced to live inside of a storage unit at one point without any power or even running water. My mother and 21-year-old younger sister, they were addicted to fentanyl amongst other drugs. We were always accompanied by their druggy friends, which consisted of weird perverted older men. My mother was in and out of jail constantly for multiple convictions, including theft, hit and run, running somebody over even, yes, quite literally. So I was always tasked with the fault of looking after the 2 younger children, 15 and 9. It was weeks, months of this in fact. The continuous drugs, the withdrawals, the jail bails, the abuse. It got so bad that we didn't have any money for food or water, so the kids spent days starving or surviving off of school food, and relied on asking men online for money where I would go to the nearest gas station and buy some food for us. It was walking distance since the truck never had any gas and was always breaking down. In any case, I met this one girl online at 29 where she sent me some money here and there for food or gas. She was flirtatious and had obvious intentions to get with me. I should note too that I was also just freshly broken up with my ex-girlfriend of 3 years. She dumped me in January before I went homeless, and I was not looking for a relationship at all at the time. I mean, I had so much on my plate. In any case, we spent a few weeks talking, and she ended up falling for me. She also made it known that she was transgender, male to female, no surgeries yet. I was a 22-year-old female, a lesbian, so I was not interested. I don't mean to sound rude or anything, I'm not transphobic, it just wasn't my thing. A few weeks in, she was aware of my abusive homeless situation and offered for me to come down to Florida and live with her. I was hesitant at first, but I was also really desperate to get out of this really bad situation that I was in. I was an immigrant in the USA. I'm from the UK, been there illegally for 11 years, so I couldn't work, and I ended up taking her up on her offer, and she bought me a plane ticket that day, set for 2 weeks later. I told my family that I was going on a cruise ship vacation for 2 weeks, and that I would be back afterward. I wasn't planning on coming back though, but my mother would not have let me leave if I said that I wasn't returning, so I had to make that up. 2 weeks passed, and my mum drove me to the airport begging me not to leave. I ignored her beggings, which she did in many, and I mean many forms. I had never traveled alone or knew how to navigate an airport at that stage, but I was desperate to get out of that situation, and desperation made me willing to do things that were potentially dangerous. I navigated the airport and had a 1-hour flight, then an 8-hour layover, then a 6-hour flight right after that. Mind you, I'm terrified to the brim of planes and heights. The traveling was awful too. I almost missed my last flight, in fact, as they changed the plane and I was not notified, so I was extremely stressed on top of everything else. But in the end, I landed at around 1 p.m. in Florida, in a black hoodie onesie no less, as Oregon was freezing cold at the time. I was instantly met by the intense humid heat of the Florida swamp. I made my way through the airport, and this girl was waiting for me at the terminal entrance. She picked me up and swung me around like we were together, then proceeded to hold my hand all the way to where she had parked her car. I was aggravated, as I didn't really enjoy this sort of physical touch, and the fact that I was nicotine deprived as well didn't make it any better. In any case, we got to the car where I yanked my hand away and threw up over the edge of the balcony from motion sickness and jet lag. I lit a cigarette up and I took in everything that had happened in the past few weeks. I also had not slept for over a day at this stage. I was too terrified to sleep on the plane. The drive home was around 2 hours though, and it was the most awkward drive that I have ever experienced. She was quiet, and I was going through a lot of mental problems, completely in denial that I was away from my nightmare situation back home. When we got to her town, she insisted that we get some food and walk around the ocean pier. I was starving, but was completely exhausted at this point, so I asked if we could just get some food and then just go home and let me sleep. She kept making excuses though, saying that she wanted to give me a tour of beautiful Florida. I was too exhausted to argue, so in the end I just went along with it. Walking around town in a black onesie in 100 degrees Fahrenheit weather, like a zombie, it's not good. She was obviously getting annoyed with me as well, as I was in a mood, which I was, I'll admit, but I did mention to her multiple times that I just needed some sleep. We got back to the house where I asked where I was sleeping, and she mentioned a single bed where she also slept. She shared a small RV with another man. We had to share a bed, which was put up as she had cats that would pee on her bedding. I asked her to pull it down, but she kept making more excuses and motioned for us to take a walk around her neighborhood to get me used to the area or something. Again, I was completely exhausted, but we went walking around, where I chain-smoked some cigarettes and tried to take in the scenery. We got back an hour later and she still refused me any sleep. The entire walk home as well, she was really touchy, trying to hold my hand and all that, and we got to her truck where I sat in the passenger side and I smoked some more. She joined me too and chain-smoked some joints. Hours went by and I ended up bawling my eyes out in front of her, which ended up in her getting annoyed with me, telling me that I should just go back home. I was all over the place mentally and sleep exhaustion was making it worse. We then went on another walk at night, and this is going on now for over a day without any sleep. We got to a little pier again though, where she was trying to kiss me and holding me. I was making her aware that I did not like this either, but she kept insisting. We got home at around 10 p.m. and finally ended up putting the bed down, where I fell asleep almost immediately. Honestly too, I cannot remember much of the next few days after that, but it consisted of like random activities around town and lots of good food, to be honest. She didn't work and relied on her roommate's income. They had a really weird relationship where she gets all the money and he just sort of works and plays video games or something. She apparently takes care of him, and it was just weird, trust me, but about a week after this is when things started to get worse. She was snapping at me over little things, getting jealous over people in my DMs and belittling my trauma, calling my family names. And look, they weren't the best, I'll admit it. In fact, they're really awful, but still, it's just not something that you want to hear from random strangers. We played a few games together though, where she'd get obviously ragey at them, and that also triggered a traumatic feeling from me, as I had a previous stepdad with video game rage, and I'd have to listen to him all night go at it, and then eventually at my mum as well. A few more days passed, and she informed me that she actually had a son, who lived with her family as she couldn't take care of him in her current situation or something. She asked me to come along with her to her family's house and meet everyone, including her son. I told her that that was not a good idea, as I didn't want him getting the wrong impression of me, as she was obviously into me and thought of me as her girlfriend. Plus, I needed some alone time desperately, as I never got any of that living with my family. She threw the biggest fit though, but eventually left, where she texted me the entire time that she was out. I kid you not even 2 hours later she returned with all of them too, brought her son inside to meet me and everything. I was furious, but it wasn't this kid's fault, so I greeted him gracefully but made a lot of attempts to hide in the bathroom or truck to smoke, and eventually they left, and that was it for the day. More days passed, and she would try to get me to go on walks with her to her roommate's work to smoke. I kept asking to stay for alone time, but each time was met with door slams and messages the entire time she was gone, and at this point the arguing was getting worse and worse. She was also getting more and more violent and was lashing out over really small things now. One lash out was her trying to fix the air conditioner, where she was getting obviously frustrated by the heat. She lashed out on me, then begged me to stand over her with a blow dryer. I told her that that was a bad idea and to just step outside for a bit and smoke and calm down. She lashed out completely on me since I refused to do this, so I left and sat out in the vehicle. She later came out to smoke in a mood, throwing things around in the truck, smoking in awkward silence with me. The arguing was getting worse and worse. I refused sexual activity with her, and she went to the extreme measures of buying me libido booster gummies to help put me in the mood. It made me uncomfortable, to say the least. She would make these remarks that she was an OnlyFans creator and knew what she was doing. Like I said before, I just really was not into her that way as well, and this led to a lot of arguments. But one night we got into an argument over me not showing her any affection, and I was tired, so I get into bed and attempted to sleep. She then threw a fit and told me that when I go to sleep, we're done. I was turned over in bed with the blankets over me, completely trying to ignore her screaming at me again. I was also bawling my eyes out at this point, I'll admit, regretting even coming down there, as I was 2,000 miles away from my family with a crazy stranger now. She would say the meanest things possible, but eventually I just sort of blocked them out. She eventually came in and out of the RV, slamming the door each time and yelling at me for around 15 minutes. And the last time that she came back in, she literally ripped the blankets off of me and forced me to go and talk to her in the truck. I refused and told her that I didn't feel like it and I just wanted to sleep. She was relentless though, so I got up and sort of zombie walked out to the truck where I smoked a cigarette and blocked out her screaming at me. She eventually left and went inside the house and blasted music so loud that it literally vibrated the truck from the outside. I spent the night crying outside for about 2 hours, where eventually I ordered some food and she came out to eat with me. We went inside and finally I was able to sleep. Anyway, to make a long story short, this whole situation went on for some time and there were roaches everywhere, drug deals going on outside, people yelling at each other, and just all sorts of mess. Eventually, though, I went to sleep one night, and the next morning I was picked up by my best friend and her father, and we drove back to her house where they set me up in their garage for a little while. And then I had the best month after that, as her family treated me amazingly. It was honestly the best month of my life that I'd ever had, and regarding this, my last interaction with this crazy girl was me going back down there to collect my passport, where she tried to keep it from me, along with taking my phone and going through all of my Facebook messages, calling me names through my own messenger. I eventually got all of my remaining stuff though, and after that I never saw her again. But the whole situation is kind of crazy to me now looking back on it. I mean, this was a random stranger with a much younger female in her presence, and she was absolutely crazy. Again, too, looking back on it all, I cannot believe I put up with everything for so long. But the thing that really troubles me the most is that she was just completely unhinged, and the way that things just kept escalating over and over again, things getting worse and worse, and I don't know. Something tells me that if I had stayed there much longer, that something would have happened to me and no one would have ever heard from me again. This is a bit of a long one, but I think about it once in a blue moon, and I wanted to share it somewhere so that it would be permanent. I thought others might be interested too, so I thought that I would tell it here. I always sensed a bit of, well, something, but this was my first real paranormal experience, I guess you could say. I was 16 to 17 at the time, and we moved into an old rundown house. I hated one section of the house in particular, including 2 bedrooms and a hallway, from the second that I stepped foot in there. But one of those bedrooms ended up being my room too. I absolutely hated that house. I constantly felt this presence that was so heavy, loud, dark, but not in the way that we typically feel, hear, or see things. That was the best way that I could describe it. It was almost like a physical thing that would follow me around, like I was aware of where it was at any given time. I could feel it coming, and it would always fill me with dread. I was terrified. I would try to go to sleep at night, and I could feel it moving towards me. It felt like it was crushing me, and it was so dense, and I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis every night. I would often just be sitting on the lounge, and I could feel it coming towards me. I felt like I was being preyed on. It would happen so constantly that I would stay at my nan and pa's house a lot, but it literally never happened to me unless I was in that house. Now, in a different house, my twins were around 3 years old at the time. They would talk about the man who supposedly sat in the sunroom and lived in the wall. They would point at one section of the wall in the hallway. They said that he was nice and protected them from the girl, and the girl freaked them out. Like, they would sprint back into the lounge room and say that they couldn't go anywhere because the girl was there. They described a little girl around 5 years old who had white skin, black hair, black eyes, cuts on her skin, wore undies, and would hiss at them with an angry face if they looked at her. The girl supposedly lived in my sister's cupboard, and they were too young to work it out at the time, but the back of my sister's cupboard was the same as the wall in the hallway where the man lived. They said that heaps of people lived in there, and we tried, but we could never find out much information about the house. Fast forward a few more years, another different old house. Hadn't experienced anything in that house until, well, stuff started happening out of nowhere. One of my twins, maybe 7 years old at the time I think, suddenly became terrified of going to bed. She refused to sleep with this one toy in her room, an old doll's pram that we had recently been given secondhand. She said that there was a black man with a tall hat who had pushed the pram back and forth in her room. The squeaking of the wheels was so loud that she had to block her ears, and he wanted her to look, but she would hide under her blanket, allegedly. And look, I know that this is going to sound bad, but I didn't really take it too seriously at the time, and just sort of kept brushing it off. At the same time, I had started having horrific nightmares, all of them about trying to protect my kids from being taken in weird places with lots of people around. They were so vivid and awful, I was constantly stressed and dreaded going to sleep. One night in the middle of the night, I'd woken up from one of those nightmares and I walked to the bathroom. I looked down the hallway and I swore that there was something at the end of it. Maybe a little bit insane, but I said, if there's something there, then please leave. And then the light switched on. I was beyond shocked. That was still to this day the most undeniable, cannot gaslight myself out of seeing that, experience that I've ever had. I didn't put two and two together as well, until the other twins started talking about it too. I had asked her to brush her teeth one night, and she had walked into the bathroom, but then sprinted back and jumped on the bed. She said, "Mom, I know you're not going to believe this because it's not real, but it is," and then went on to explain the same top hat man who she said had been hanging around the house for a couple of weeks. She said that he followed her around and watched her while she was in her room or the bathroom. I asked if she had ever spoken to her twin about it, but she said no, so I called her in. The conversation that they had then was really creepy too, but fascinating to listen to. They were going back and forth describing the same experiences and agreeing with each other. I have no idea why they hadn't talked about it to each other until then, but everything kind of clicked into place then, and we were like, okay, this is weird. We need to sort this out. Ceremoniously threw the toy pram out the front door, and we tried out a bunch of hippie house cleansing stuff, and weirdly it just never happened again after that. Now, you're probably not going to believe this, but we were in yet another old house afterward. Super straightforward experience here, but I kept feeling a light, white, feminine presence around me, like I would see a white, cloudy thing out of the corner of my eye sometimes. It didn't feel threatening, so I'd just carry on about my day. Happened pretty often in that house too. On the other hand, one of my twins refused to sleep in her initially designated bedroom because of what she called the fat lady. One of the first nights we lived there, she came bolting out of her room screaming because the fat lady supposedly stuck her head out of the wall above her and screamed in her face. I didn't hear anything about it after the first week or two of living there, but she would not go back in that room. Just before I gave birth to my fourth child, I could feel this super positive energy around, like undeniably something there, almost like a physical thing that I could see and feel as a light, airy thing. I didn't acknowledge it to anyone, I just felt it there, but One day, my daughter walks into my room and we're chatting for a sec. I could feel this presence in the hallway at my door, but didn't say anything. As my daughter walked out, she paused for a second in the doorway, turned around to me and went to say something, but I stopped her, told her to wait, and I quickly wrote down what I had just been seeing or feeling, then told her that she could start talking. And yeah, she goes on to ask if I've noticed the white shadowy thing hanging around. I showed her what I had written down, and that one was a pretty cool experience. I don't know why, but I was always certain that it was my partner's nan. I'd never met her, but something was telling me that. And this is our current experience and what has prompted me to dig all of this up and share it with you guys. My pa died in April of this year, and a few days after his funeral, my son's toys started turning on when I'd walk past his room. I brushed it off as it was nothing really significant enough for me to mention to my sister, but just so I had it in writing, I guess I wrote it down. I didn't acknowledge it to anyone else. Since then, though, my son, 5 years old, has been talking about what he calls the magic in his room. He's constantly telling me about how the magic keeps moving his toys and taking out his books. I keep suggesting that maybe it's one of us moving his things, but he is adamant that it's the magic. He says that it wants to push my cars. It's like a person, but it's not because that's not real. Like the fairies and stuff. He has said that it's weird, but he doesn't seem scared by it or anything. And well, if you've gotten this far, then thanks for listening. I don't blame you if you think that I'm insane and full of it, or both. I honestly don't put too much thought into all of this in my day-to-day life. Just a little bit of a collection of unexplained experiences that I've had, I guess. I have no idea what to make of it all, but it's definitely opened my eyes to the other side of, well, life, I guess. I hope that there's a God because, well, I have a lot of questions for him when I die. I was around 6 when it happened. My parents had tucked me in for bed. I live in a rural countryside, so nighttime is very quiet here, no sounds of cars or anything. It's usually very peaceful, and I was laying on my back when suddenly I heard the sound of like long nails scratching the wood under my bed. The reason this incident sticks out to me is because I can still remember the feeling of my heart dropping out of my stomach and feeling paralyzed with fear. I was about to call out for my parents when my dad crawled out from under my bed and stood up in the dark, just looking at me. He said, "You forgot to say your prayers," then walked out of my room. I was understandably shocked. I didn't leave my bed afterwards, and I must have fallen asleep at some point. My dad would normally tell me to say my prayers before bed, so this seemed like something that he would say, but I have no idea what would possess him to hide under my bed. My dad denies ever doing this, but I brought it up numerous times over the years, and he has never admitted to doing it. I never really considered until recently, though, that he definitely doesn't have nails long enough to make the deep scratching sound that I heard. But what do you guys think? Maybe I fell asleep and had a vivid dream? I also considered that it could be something paranormal, but I don't know. To answer a few basic questions, though, no, I can't remember if I asked my parents about the incident the next morning, but since then I have asked repeatedly over the last 20-ish years, and my dad has never owned up to it. I believe at this point, though, that my dad couldn't have done it because, well, one, my dad likes scary stuff and would absolutely take credit for a prank that scared me so bad like that. 2, my parents had been gone from my room for probably about 10 minutes before I even heard the scratching. It's possible my dad could have stayed behind, but he could not easily fit under my bed without me noticing, that's for sure. 3, he's not really a drinker, so I doubt that he was passed out on the floor or anything. I'd like to believe that it was just sleep paralysis, like many have theorized. However, that would be my one and only time experiencing it, so that's a bit odd, right? There's definitely a chance that it could have been something more sinister, and It's something that I hope to never, ever encounter again. I once held a hunting lease in Middle Georgia. It was an abandoned hunting camp that hadn't been used in several years. I'm not superstitious at all, but this place was legitimately spooky. It was miles down an overgrown dirt road and completely surrounded by woods. It's probably the most secluded place that I've ever been. I used to hunt there by myself a lot, and there was always this weird sense that I wasn't alone out there. There was a locked gate at the front of the property, but it was not uncommon for us to find the front door of the cabin open, even when the door was locked. That was pretty creepy, but that's not what this story is about. One evening, I was hunting down in a small valley by a food plot that we put lining a creek that bordered the property at. From the minute that I sat down, I had a weird feeling, like I wasn't in a safe place even though I was holding a gun with ballistic-tipped rounds. I just didn't feel like I was the top predator out there, if you know what I mean. I didn't see any deer while I was sitting at the stand, but the forest was abuzz with activity that day. Birds, squirrels, and other critters singing their normal evening symphony. And then, all of a sudden, just silence. Everything just stopped. It felt like everything in the woods was just looking right at me, too. It was getting dark fast anyways, and I was obviously extremely creeped out by that, so I packed up my gear and started the walk back up to the cabin. About 100 yards away, I had this feeling that something was coming up behind me. I spun around and pointed my rifle back down the pathway towards the food plot, and that was when I saw it. There was something standing in the middle of the path. It wasn't a person, but it didn't look like a deer or anything that I've seen before. There was hardly any light to make out any features, but it almost looked like some kind of bipedal deer or something. It was just standing there, staring at me too. I quickly made my way back up to the cabin, packed my stuff up, and I just got out of there. I just let the lease run out, and after that, I never went back there. Last year, I started law school in Los Angeles. I have never lived in a big city before, and I was really excited to be in a massive city with over 4 million people. Ever since I was little, I always knew that I had a half-sister in LA, but my parents had this weird anger toward her that always made me feel like a taboo topic, I guess. Of course, I had looked her up on social media, and I knew what she looked like, but that was about all. We had never actually met, and she was never that active on social media, so there wasn't a lot that I could see anyway. But out of nowhere one day in my first year of law school, I got a friend request on Facebook from my sister. Her profile seemed legitimate, and she had Facebook friends, and her profile picture looked like her. She sent me a message inviting me to a little dinner party at the park with her friends. We could finally meet each other for the first time. I was new to LA as well, still sort of am, and had no idea which parts of the city to avoid at night. I was really excited about that idea though, but I also had a lot of anxiety about it too. It would be nice if we had met, totally clicked, and became besties for life. But what if we ended up sobbing like we were in some dramatic movie scene? What if I tried to talk with her and she just didn't click with me, and she started showing me an attitude? Or worse, what if it's all going well until we have some kind of disagreement? Someone said something hurtful, and then we were both crying in front of everyone. Honestly, if she had suggested a cozy little bakery for desserts instead, I probably would have gone. But going to a park with other people just didn't feel right. I thought that it was like such a precious moment that I didn't want to have it in front of all these other people. I couldn't bring myself to go, in fact. I didn't want to have to risk having a meltdown in front of all these other people. I was worried about how messy it would get. Anyway, a few weeks later, I googled that park just to see what it was like. Maybe we could meet up there together, just one-on-one after all. And that's when I learned that something was wrong. I won't say the name of the park, but anyone who has lived in LA for long enough will tell you that it's not a safe place for girls to be having a dinner party at night. The area surrounding that park has very high violent crime rates. It's controlled by gangs. Even people who do illegal business in that park are forced to pay a tax to the gang in exchange for being left alone. So now, I was really concerned, but also curious. I actually tried to get a hold of my sister myself. She was an undergrad at the time at a local college. I had a friend who went to her school. I asked my friend to reach out to her on campus and ask her if she'd be okay with meeting us. They connected and the three of us met at my friend's house. And thankfully it was great. We got along really well. My friend was also very happy to do that for us. The three of us had a lot of fun. We weren't bursting in tears, but we let out a few, and we had dinner, we watched a movie, and we spent the night at my friend's house. When I told my sister about that whole thing, she said that she hadn't used Facebook since like high school. So clearly somebody was impersonating her. I would have told her to have reported the fake account, but unfortunately, it had already been deleted. She knew that she had been impersonated on social media, though. Another one of her friends had been scammed by someone pretending to be her, and it was some scheme involving fake concert tickets or something like that. Someone, though, had been impersonating my sister. They knew that I was in town, and they literally tried to lure me into one of the most dangerous parts of LA at night. I still have no idea what their actual motives were, but I don't know if I even want to find out, to be honest. I mean, that's a very, very scary thought. Meeting my sister after all these years was a beautiful thing, but the whole backdrop, it was terrifying. This happened 4 years back. It was the middle of winter and the night was unseasonably warm, without a hint of snow on the ground. I left my apartment at around 8 p.m. to go for my daily walk. I worked night shifts and my schedule was pretty messed up, hence the 8 p.m. walk, figuring that I would cross the bridge into the city nearby. For further context, I'm a pretty tall guy who's fairly athletic, and I was in my late 20s at this moment. I'd rarely had a problem walking at night, and at the time I felt safe to do so. So I put my headphones in and I headed towards the bridge. The first 20 minutes were uneventful. I passed by old houses, a subpar Mexican restaurant, a really good Mexican restaurant, a sketchy gas station, and some newly built upscale apartments. And finally, I was at the river, enjoying the view of the bright lights over the dark flowing water, not yet frozen. I crossed the bridge into the city and hit a crosswalk button at a four-way intersection, and then noticed someone standing on the corner opposite, the only other soul I'd seen outside of that night. Seemingly, she was doing nothing, and I assumed that she was waiting for an Uber to come and pick her up, since she didn't seem to be waiting for the light to change. The street, ordinarily busy during the daytime, was now silent. The light changed and I crossed, heading in her direction. As I neared her, I noticed that she would cast glances in my direction and then sort of look away, almost sheepishly. She did this multiple times, and I figured that she was just unnerved by me. I sympathized with that, figuring that it must have made her uneasy, us being the only two people on a dimly lit street like this. As I passed by, I took in her outfit, mostly because I thought that she looked cold. She wore a knitted hat with tassels, a sweater that looked too thin for the winter, tight jeans, and a little plastic children's backpack on her back. I thought that she was in her teens at first, but upon closer inspection she appeared to be in her late 20s or maybe even early 30s. She had short cropped light brown hair and a pale complexion. She was skinny and was of average height. I was maybe a head taller than her, I would guess. But I walked by and continued down the street without much more of a thought. I passed by high-rise hotels on my right and left and made my way into a central park. During peak hours, this place would be packed with tourists and locals alike, but That day, at an odd hour and with the pandemic in full swing, I felt like the only man in the city. I admired the brilliant display of lighted trees as I crossed through the center of the park, and then, figuring I was at a good halfway point in my journey, I made my way around an old marble and stone library back towards the bridge. As I turned the corner of the library back into the street from which I'd come, I nearly collided with someone moving towards me. It was that same woman that I'd seen not even 10 minutes earlier. My noise-cancelling headphones were still on, so I pulled down one side and said something by way of apology, but she said nothing in return. Instead, she sort of backed away from me and stood below a streetlight, not making eye contact. She stole tiny glances at me, that same tick that I'd noticed before. I put my headphones back on, nodded a good night, and I headed towards the nearest crosswalk. Reason told me that she must have been headed in the direction that I'd come from, since we'd nearly run into each other headed the opposite ways, but some part of me whispered that she wasn't headed that way. And sure enough, when I turned to look, she was trailing close behind me, her strides surprisingly long and energetic. I found this odd enough that I continued to watch her out of the corner of my eye. Shortly after I reached the crosswalk, as I stood there waiting for the light to change, she caught up with me, passed me by, and stopped. A car went past, and as it did so, she squatted over her plastic bag a few meters from me, rifling frantically for something, looking up at me on occasion. I hit a button on my headphones, stopping my podcast so that I could hear her better. What I found disturbing about the motion of her looking through her bag is that it struck me as, well, fake, as though she were pretending for some reason. She was barely looking inside, and her careless motion struck more like bad acting. Something about her motions and the way that she kept looking at me felt wrong. The light changed and I began to walk quickly, but she was faster. She stood suddenly, darting past me towards the museum, swinging the half-open little pink backpack over her shoulder. I watched her silhouette disappear into the darkness beyond the reach of the streetlights. I honestly hoped that that was the end of it, and after a few beats of not seeing her, I let my guard down a little bit, restarting my podcast. Now, beyond the museum was a patch of poorly lit sidewalk, in front of a squat building with mirror-like windows. I wasn't far from the bridge now, and as I made my way back there, I turned my head to look at the reflections of the buildings and the streetlights in the windows. And to my horror, a dark figure sprinted silently towards my reflection, dreamlike. I'm not sure why, but maybe out of sheer confusion, I turned to meet her as she hurtled towards me. Perhaps surprised by my sudden turn, she halted mere feet from me, staring, her eyes wide and looked frantic and wild. She kept looking at my arms, then back at my face, as though almost sizing me up. My accidental bluff had worked, and in the darkness I suppose I must have looked more prepared to fight back than I felt. But she gripped something small tightly in one hand. Though she held it off to the side and in the shadow of the building, I could see what it was. Seconds dragged as we stood there staring at one another. Immobilized by fear and confusion, I waited for her to make some move, to attempt to use whatever object she held in her hand. And just then, to my enormous relief, a car trundled slowly past us. A bit of my strength returned, and over my blaring podcast, I felt more than heard myself shouting at her, "What do you want?" No reply. I slowly backed away from her, expecting her to move, but she just watched me, that same intense look on her face. I took another step back, then another, steadily backing away from her until I felt confident enough to turn and carefully walk away. As I reached a better lit area, I began to move more quickly, all the while keeping my eyes trained on her shadowy form. She stood there for some time, statuesque in fact. Then, abruptly having spontaneously abandoned whatever plan that she may have had for me, she turned from me and, without looking for traffic, she crossed the street with long strides
and disappeared around the corner of a building. Something about the casual air of it, though, just really disturbed me. I kept my eyes trained behind me on my walk home, afraid that she would follow me. The bridge was well lit, and I saw no sign of her, knowing that this was the only way for her to follow me and keep up on foot. I breathed a sigh of relief. I saw no more cars headed from the city, no more pedestrians out walking. Thankfully, nothing happened after that. I'm not sure why, but I didn't call the cops that night. I still regret having not called, despite my roommates insisting that I do so. I just remember sort of thinking that I wasn't sure what to say to the cops, that I hadn't really been attacked, I guess, that they wouldn't be able to find her anyway. I made up excuses, I guess, but I suppose I must have been in shock, maybe, in denial at having been nearly ambushed, especially by someone smaller than me, in my own city, so close to my apartment. One of my roommates called the cops for me, though, and a cop did drive through the area, but by that point, she was gone. So I live in the southwest of the UK, and years ago, when I was around 17, this would have been about 15 years ago, I think, I got kicked out by my mum, who I was living with, because we had an argument. I wandered the streets that night, trying to stay awake. I asked friends if I could stay with them, but that wasn't an option, unfortunately. At the time, I lived in a relatively new suburban area, so I decided to walk into the nearby woods that overlooked some farmland, hoping to watch the stars and find a place to sleep. This was at around 2 in the morning. There was a large wooded area near some flats, and I crawled through a thicket which led to an open space. As I walked through, it was pitch black, and I thought that this would be a nice, safe area to try and sleep at. As I lay down, suddenly I heard footsteps, though. They sounded heavy and loud, and it sounded like they were circling me. I froze and asked if somebody was there. The footsteps got faster and faster, pacing around me. Then I heard a deep growl, and whatever it was, it sounded big. I panicked and ran away through that same thicket and back onto the street. At the time, I had about £100 in my bank account, so I wandered to a nearby hotel to see if I could get a room, but they wouldn't let me in. I was cold, desperate, and scared, so I walked to a nearby 24-hour shop, bought some snacks, a torch, and I made my way back to the thicket, and this time I was armed with light. When I returned to the woods, I heard the footsteps again. I quickly turned on the torch, shining it all around, looking for where the footsteps were coming from, but I couldn't see anything. Then I heard the growl again, and it was deep and reverberating. It sounded like it was right next to me. I could hear it, but I couldn't see it, but whatever it was, it sounded big. And no matter how much I shone that torch around, I just could not see what was making the noise. I ran away to a nearby bus stop, and I spent the night there awake but scared, and spent my night there too. The next day, I met up with a friend and I told her what had happened, and I wanted to investigate, so me and her went to go through that thicket and into that open place, and she was scared after the story that I told her, but it was daylight. I went in again and she stayed outside. But I heard the growl again, really loud and really close. But it was daylight this time, and I could hear it but not see it anywhere. I know that this sounds crazy, but believe me, it scared the absolute living daylights out of me. And nobody believes what I witnessed. And really, I don't blame them, because I wouldn't believe it if somebody told me too. But if you have any similar stories, then please do let me know, because I would love to hear them, and know that I'm not the only one who has experienced something like this. This happened a few hours ago. So in my town, there's a story that a guy has moved into the deep woods close to our town. I never believed it, as I go for night drives occasionally, and I've never seen him or anything resembling a man that lives in the woods. Anyway, tonight I decided to go for a drive and drove past a pizza place. Being hungry, I decided to get a pizza before I went home. In my head, I had a plan to eat the pizza and play some Minecraft, as I'm in my 2-week Minecraft phase at the moment. I paid for my pizza and started walking to my car with the pizza in one hand and my phone in the other hand, messaging my friend if he wanted to play some Minecraft when I got home. I look up from my phone to cross the road to the car park, and I see something under my car. It looks like a shadow or something dark. I put my phone in my pocket and pull out my keys. I unlock the car to scare off anything close to the car. I was thinking that it could be a cat or a dog just sort of hanging around my car, but when I unlock the car, nothing happens. No cat running away and nobody running away. The shadow looked like it was cast from the driver's side, so I was going to have to look at whatever it was, whether I wanted to or not to get in. I put my keys away and pull out my phone again and turn the flashlight on to see better in the dark. And as I turn towards the driver's side of my car, I see him. A dirty, naked man with big eyes staring right at me. He was crouched down trying to hide from me, and now, I don't usually get scared of anything really, but this guy terrified me. He looked like he had rolled around in mud and it had dried out his skin. His eyes looked creepy, bloodshot and kind of bulging out of his head, and obviously he was completely naked. I get startled and sort of jumped backwards out of instinct, dropping my pizza in the process. It falls out of its box and onto the floor. I start moving back slowly and shout at him to get away from my car. He looks up at me and then at the pizza, then back at me again. He tilts his head to one side and then jumps towards the pizza like a dog, grabs it, and starts running away down the road, and I assume that he ran all the way to the woods. I wouldn't know where he went as I didn't feel like following him, but he definitely was in those woods somewhere. I lock my car and run back to the pizza place, and I just stay there for a bit. The workers obviously don't believe me when I tell them what had happened, but I know what I saw. Once the fear subsides after a while, I realize that this guy just stole my pizza. Angry as I was looking forward to it, I decided to get another one and run to my car this time. I get in and put the pizza on the passenger seat, and then I just go home. Once I got home, I locked all of my doors and windows. I even locked my bedroom door as I feel a little bit scared still. I think that I'll be playing Minecraft until the sun comes up. This entire scenario happened a few years ago when I used to take walks alone, occasionally at night, which is something that I thought very little of since I lived in a heavily residential wealthy area. In other words, on the trail I'd frequent, houses were always within sight. On one such night, shortly into my walk, I see a figure walking a few 100 feet behind me, something that I knew immediately was pretty odd, considering it was around 10 at night at the time. At first, I discounted this thought, since it was a public trail, and they could have very well been doing the exact same thing as me, just going for a walk. I continued on for roughly 5 to 10 minutes or so before looking behind me once more, only to find the same person still trailing me. Keep in mind that at this point, I'd gone through a few turns by now on the trail, meaning that it was becoming more and more unlikely that this person just so happened to be going to the same location. I decided to take odd paths and directions, turning off into the gravel and weirder, more roundabout side areas, and they still followed me. By the time that I was reaching the apex of my journey, passing by the local park, they were maybe less than 60 feet behind me, a distance that they could easily have covered in seconds. It's then that I decided to call my family. I had researched for this, I knew what to do, and believe it or not, the call, it didn't go through. As it turns out, my phone was a recent gift, and its service had been set up improperly, meaning that no matter how many times I frantically called in that moment, nothing would happen. In a decision I call back to as one of my best to this day, I acted as if the call had gone through, and was on the phone with my mum, miming out and talking audibly about my location and the person behind me, beginning to briefly describe them. Even in the act, I wasn't able to really do so, but as I could never get a proper view of their face, as if it was somehow shrouded in something, I did my best with what I had. And sure enough, when I turned around again, they were nowhere to be seen. And not that they had turned off and walked in another direction, but it was as if they weren't there to begin with.